Welcome to the All Creatures Podcast. This is Chris. I'm super excited today to introduce this guest. And I don't know if Dr. Richard Dawkins really needs an introduction, but Angie and I are here today to speak with him and pick his mind. This is one of the world's leading, if not top, evolutionary biologists. Just a quick bio on Dr. Dawkins. He was born in Kenya, and then he moved to the UK when he was 8 years old. Studied zoology at the University of Oxford, graduated with honors, then stays on to finish his doctorate. And I didn't know this, but Dr. Dawkins went off and was an assistant professor of zoology at UC Berkeley in a very interesting time in the late 1960s. And then he went on to go back to the University of Oxford and he was on faculty there since 1970. In 1995, he was appointed the Simony Professor of Public Understanding of Science at Oxford, which he held until 2008. He's authored 17 books now, some that you might have read: The Selfish Gene, The God Delusion, The Greatest Show on Earth, The Evidence for Evolution. I'm trying to get my hands on that down here in New Zealand. And then today we're going to talk about his latest book, Flights of Fancy, Defying Gravity by Design and Evolution. Dr. Dawkins, first, welcome, but I just have to say this book blew me away. The artwork was jaw-dropping. It was a real treat to read this, and I just want to say congratulations on your latest book, but wow, welcome, and thank you for writing this book.
Thank you very much.
Oh, Dr. Dawkins, this is a dream come true for me. Studying your work years ago as an undergrad in zoology, this is just a real treat for me. And as Chris mentioned, every night for the past couple of weeks, I've got to go to bed reading your book and holding it in my hands and being just moved and entertained. I giggled out loud and I learned a lot. I actually felt bad pinning back some of the pages that were my favorites. So I just have a whole bunch of bookmarks in there to take more notes from. And not only the words on the page, which are incredible, all about birds and flying and inspiring science. It was just fantastic. But the artwork is incredible. Even touching the prints, they're slightly raised. Your graphic illustrator definitely needs a big shout out to Jana Linzova. Am I saying that right?
Yes.
So I can't wait to get talking more about this book in detail. I promise to our listeners we will get there. But our first question for you is your curiosity and love for science in the natural world. When did that begin? And did you have that aha moment that pushed you forward in your sciences?
Rather ashamed to admit it was rather late, actually. Not until I got to Oxford did I get really enthusiastic about science. I sort of rather wasted my school days. And then when I got to Oxford, the discipline of the Oxford tutorial, where you have to write an essay every week and you have to go into the library. Well, nowadays, you probably just go onto the internet. But when I was an undergrad, you went into the library.
Me too. Yes.
Okay.
I got lost there once and sat down in the corner and cried a little bit. But then I picked myself back up. But it was so confusing how to find the book that I was supposed to find. But then I got help from the librarian and I checked out the book.
What I liked about it was that we were not using textbooks. We were using the original research literature.
Absolutely.
So I would be given a list of papers to go and look up in the original journals. And then I had to write an essay, synthesizing, criticizing, balancing arguments. And because the topic was rather narrow, it was possible to read all the recent research literature on that topic and become, as an undergraduate, in effect, an expert on this very, very narrow subject.
Yeah.
And that, I think that fired me. That fired me up because I felt I was with the big boys and girls. I was
contributing and
yes, that's right. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that fascinates me is, since we started doing this podcast and if I had to go back and redo my PhD, I think I would go into evolutionary biology. It is a field that just fascinates me, and every species we cover, when I do start studying their evolutionary history, and that goes back millions of years, if not if not tens of millions of years, it's a field that just is fantastic to study. So I'm a bit jealous that I went to animal physiology, and you've been able to study this for so many years. What pushed you into evolution? What was, what pushed you to study it? And then how does it help us understand our natural world today? And then leading up to the book, Flights of Fancy, the evolution of flight, but the bigger picture, why is evolution so important to science?
Yes, well, I mean, I think you said it when you said you regretted not doing it yourself. I mean, it is,
Yeah.
it's what makes sense of everything else.
Mhm.
It always astonishes me the way the evolution chapter is usually last in the textbook instead of being first. How can you possibly study any aspect of biology and without asking the question, what's it all for? What's it all about?
Mhm.
It seems, I think it's astonishing that anybody can study biology without studying evolution. So I'm not sure that question needs an answer. I mean,
Yeah.
anybody who does biology can't help getting into it. I actually did my PhD in Oxford, we call it DPhil, in animal behavior. And I just retained an interest in evolution from my undergraduate days and then returned to that later. So I don't think I ever had an aha moment. I think I just, well, the whole of biology forces you to have an aha moment about evolution, I suppose.
Well, and for a lot of our listeners that might not be as familiar with some of the evolutionary processes or even some grand examples of evolution, would you mind sharing with our listeners some of your favorite or one of your favorite stories of evolution and how, like, I love your analogy about the eye and how that evolved. Would you mind sharing that with us?
Yes, well, that was really in answer to the common creationist question, what's the use of half an eye? And so you can do that with quite a lot of things.
Sure.
Taking an organ and of high complexity
Mm-hmm.
and showing how it could evolve from something simple. So the eye is a very good example. Wings are another very good example. What's the use of half a wing? And they have a chapter on that in the book. Um, you can look at another way of looking at it is look at fossils, and eyes on the whole don't fossilize. So there are certain groups of animals where there's a beautiful fossil history that you can follow. I mean, whales is a good example. Horses another one. Elephants another one. In the case of whales, we know from molecular evidence that whales are related to hippopotamuses, oddly enough. It's a very strange finding. Nobody saw that coming. That was
No, yeah.
No.
right. But now we do have a fairly good fossil record of whales where you have an obviously land-dwelling animal with legs, and then you have an animal that spent part of its time in water, but also with legs and arms. And then gradually the arms and legs shrank until now with modern whales, the arms have become flippers and the legs have just disappeared altogether. There's traces of the bones inside. So that's a very nice fossil history. The example of the eye that you mentioned, well, Darwin himself did that. Darwin himself said the eye is a big problem, and then he solved the problem. Creationists love to quote just the first part of the sentence, just the way he says it's a big problem, and leave out the second part where he actually answers it. So I've done that a number of times, but so have other people. I think the wing is a nice example because, what's the use of half a wing? And we have a whole chapter on that in Flights of Fancy, where the answer is that anything that increases the surface area of an animal enables it to jump a little bit further for example, if it's a squirrel up in the trees, if it can jump a certain distance without a little flap of skin, it increases the surface area. It then can jump just a bit further if it has a flap of skin. And the bigger the flap of skin, the further it can jump, until in the end you get things like flying squirrels, which can glide hundreds of yards from one tree to another. And there's a gradual ramp of improvement, a gradual step-by-step improvement, which is what you need. So that's, it's easy to see how that could have culminated in true flight with something like a bat. Already, if you watch things like flying squirrels and the Australian flying phalanger, the marsupial equivalent, or the flying lemur, which is not a lemur, but that has a sort of flying sort of parachute. These are you can see them controlling their glide. They move the limbs in a way that steers them. And it's very easy to see how that could turn into true flapping flight.
Well, absolutely. And from flight and all the feathered flying dinosaurs that we have currently out there, some of them have decided to not use their wings, and their wings have shrunk down. Why do you think that is?
Well, that's remarkable too. I mean, we have a chapter in the book on that very subject. If flying is so great, why do some animals lose their power of flight, lose their wings? I think it's something like 60 different families of birds. When they arrive on islands, lose their wings or shrink their wings, probably because there are no predators on the islands, so they don't need the wings. And then you have to realize that biology is a strongly economic subject. Wings are costly. They're costly to make, costly to use, and the muscles that you need to power them are also very costly, and it's very energetically costly when you actually do use them. The extremely dramatic example of wings not being needed is when queen ants have had their mating flight, and the only reason they have wings at all is that they fly and mate on the wing. Then they settle down on the ground and dig a hole and start a new nest. Before doing that, they actually bite their own wings off or tear them off. Well, that really is a dramatic demonstration of wings not being necessary.
No, I found that chapter fascinating because you definitely jumped into a lot of birds down here in New Zealand. The extinct moa, the kiwi. We have the kakapo, and even our bats. Tend to be ground dwelling a little bit. And
that's right. That's exactly right. Have you read Douglas Adams's wonderful description of the kakapo? Douglas Adams wrote in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy Man. Also wrote a book called Last Chance to See on animals that are in danger of going extinct. And he wanted to go around the world recording in his own inimitable style descriptions of these animals. And the kakapo, he said, it has forgotten how to fly, but it's forgotten that it's forgotten how to fly. And so it climbs up in a tree and launches off and then plummets to the ground. But it's very endearing, his description of it.
Yeah, yes, and I hope to see one. There's talks of them finally reintroducing them on the main island again. So less than 200 left in the world.
And they're on one of the outlying islands, aren't they?
Yes, down, I think Stewart Island or down near Stewart Island, off the South Island. Yeah. Yes. But they're doing well. They're doing well on the one island they have. But again, that's why New Zealand we're in such dire crisis sometimes, because all these ground dwelling birds getting picked off by all the introduced mammals. To kind of start this off, so getting into this, Dr. Dawkins, what inspired you to write Flights of Fancy? Because it is such a fascinating, all these different aspects of evolution, like we even talked about whales and hippos and how that whole process happened through the evolutionary history. But what made you decide, you know what, I really want to talk about flight?
Well, I mean, I could have written about swimming or digging. I mean,
I hope you do. That was one of
Yeah,
my follow-up
exactly. I mean,
questions.
these are all
I would like one on
fascinating.
each big topic.
Yeah,
Yes.
these are fascinating subjects. I mean, you think about animals that live underground and burrow through the ground.
Or the deep diving mammals.
Deep diving. I mean, that's right. I mean, maybe that'll be the next one. But flying does have a sort of fascination, I think, for all of us. Many of us dream of flying.
Yes, I'm very lucky to have had a handful of them.
Yes, and people who make computer games, let you fly with your avatar, and that's great fun too. Throughout history, people have dreamed of flying. I mean, Leonardo da Vinci, for example, we have discussed him a bit and his inventions of flying. I think we feel kind of trapped on the ground. And when you watch a bird so free up there, able to travel through the third dimension, it's a great longing that people have, I think. But as I said before, maybe the next one will be about swimming.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
That would be amazing.
And Dr. Dawkins, while you were researching and preparing the book, did you learn anything new, or did anything surprise you when you were writing the book?
Oh, I think so. Yes, I probably can't think of any specific examples just off the cuff, but yes, I learned a lot. I mean, I read a lot for it, and
yeah, the aerial plankton really struck me. I really enjoyed that chapter.
Yes,
I never thought of it like that.
No, quite. I mean, the principle that animals need to spread their offspring far and wide, even though they may be living in a very good place. It's because it's not going to be good forever. Animals, if animals look back at their ancestry, they're going to see their ancestors probably came from a different place, and for good reason.
And they survived too, right?
Yeah,
they had to survive.
Yeah.
And then go to a different place. It's incredible.
Yeah, the aerial plankton is full of creatures doing that and spreading their pollen or spreading their seeds, their spores, their young, little spiders, little insects spreading around the world. So yes, I learned a lot about that.
One of my favorite quotes in the book, and I wrote this down, and I'm going to carry this one for quite a while. And I definitely, again, for our listeners, this book is wow, jaw-dropping. Wow, you're interested in science, read this book. It is amazing. And there was one sentence in there. It said, "Individuals die, but genes live on as copies." And that just so perfectly captures what evolution is. And when you were talking about, spreading genetics and breeding, I would, if you could go back in time and watch this process unfold, what evolutionary pressures do you think pushed animals to start to fly? And I think we started with insects, right? And then we went to pterodactyls, and then to birds.
Yeah, insects were way ahead of the vertebrate. Yes, but insects, and then I suppose pterosaurs after that, and then birds and bats. I think in a way that the wonder is they didn't fly sooner. I mean, given that insects could do it, and yes, it's quite surprising that it waited as long as it did. That birds and bats waited as long as they did, and pterosaurs. I mean, because if you think about what flight is good for, we have a chapter on that as well. It's good for so many things. It's good. I mean, it's fast travel, escaping from predators, spotting food, migrating. All these things flight is good for, and so it's sort of surprising it didn't evolve sooner.
And do you think that some of these gliding species or flying snakes that you mentioned in the book, that I'm like, okay, Chris, we have to cover that one on the podcast, that they don't technically fly, but they glide in the lizards as well. Do you think that over time they may develop wings and fly, or do you have any? Is there any examples of
I suppose
evolution?
one reason why they might not is that birds and bats are already there. And so the niches are already filled by birds and bats. And so that perhaps if by some, if a plague of a virus wiped out all the birds, then I could imagine perhaps, and bats, and I can imagine that perhaps flying squirrels or flying phalangers might stay up in the air instead of just gliding for 100 yards. Gliding for 100 yards is a pretty spectacular thing to do.
Yes, definitely. Or jumping through the water, like the the flying fish.
Flying fish, yes.
Just incredible.
And flying squid as well, doing the same thing but backwards.
Right. They use the jet propulsion backwards. I have to see. I don't know if there's a video of that on YouTube or somewhere, but I need to see that. Yeah, that's awesome. So great. And now switching gears a little bit, because Chris and I are big fan of educating not only our listeners to the podcast, but also the youth. We do have some younger listeners that are very passionate about animals and both science. And so I'm wondering if you have any advice on how to help instill passion and curiosity for science, nature, and the scientific method in kids.
Oh, I always hate that question. I think, I personally am not, I don't subscribe to the view that the way to make it interesting is to make it hands-on.
Okay.
That on the face of it, that would seem to be an obvious thing to do. And it is a good thing to do, but I think an equally good, if not better thing to do is to inspire them with the poetry of science. The Carl Sagan approach, which you can do with biology as well. In his case, looking at the immensity of the universe, the romance of the stars and galaxies, you can inspire people with that. And that can be sort of hands-on as well. There's a lovely demonstration, forget who thought it up, of the sheer size of the universe, where you take the children out onto a playing field and you deposit a soccer ball on the ground to represent the sun. And then to scale, you then want to represent Earth. And so you walk, I forget what it is, maybe 20 yards. And then you put down a peppercorn. I may have got that wrong, but it's like something. I think it's more actually would be more like a pinhead. And then you walk maybe 100 yards. I can't remember, to put down Jupiter. And so you've got the solar system, which you can just about fit onto a large playing field. And then what about the nearest star, Proxima Centauri? Pick up another soccer ball and walk 2,000 miles. And that's the nearest star.
That's crazy. What a great visual. Yes.
So that's a way of inspiring them. And they love that. I've actually done that with children. They love it. And it really does turn them on. That kind of thing, that is sort of hands-on. But the kind of hands-on which is I don't know, the science of cookery, or I wouldn't do that. Trying to bring it down to trying to bring it down to the familiar, the mundane. It's not mundane. It's exciting.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful, poetic, definitely.
Yeah, that's why we studied for so long in college to get there. So, doctors, where do you see flight going if you could speed up time and the species that we have today? Do you see anything like fantastical in the future for flight? Different animals either evolving, de-evolving.
I sort of feel if it was going to happen, it would already have done. If, for example, we note in the book that ballooning is a perfectly good way of getting lift.
Mhm.
No animal's done it. And I sort of feel it probably won't happen since it hasn't happened already. That would be one example of an innovation which hasn't been tried yet.
Mhm.
Using something like hydrogen. Animals can make gases that are lighter than air. They can make methane, they can make hydrogen. And they can make silk. And so to make a balloon would not be, you might think would not be beyond them. I mean, the components, the individual components are there. Jet propulsion, well, that happens in water. I can't imagine quite how that would evolve in air. Space travel is probably not a possibility.
Yeah, with some species,
I
yeah.
don't know what you have in mind. We've already talked about whether things like flying squirrels might turn into truly flying animals.
So,
Angie, you mentioned flying snakes and flying frogs. I mean, they're wonderful. The flying snake doesn't have wings at all, really. It just flattens its body.
Well, it moves its rib cage.
That's right. It widens its rib cage, but it's not like the flying lizard where the ribs really do shoot out. The ribs themselves shoot out.
That's right. The ribs shoot out. It's incredible.
Skin stretching between them. That the snake doesn't do that. It just simply makes the body a bit flatter by pushing the ribs out.
Okay.
And it kind of wriggles its way through the air. It pretty much the same kind of motion as it has on land. Flying from one tree to another. It's a spectacular sight. Look it up on YouTube. It's a lovely thing.
I'm going to, yeah. Well, we'll have to cover one of those species on our podcast for sure, because this book definitely perked my curiosity, which is a sign of a great book, as you always do whenever I read one of your books or listen to one of your talks. With everything that's happening with global climate change, and birds and their numbers are declining. Many migratory species, especially here in North America, we're losing them at a drastic rate as far as we can tell. Is there any evidence of birds starting to evolve changes to be able to adapt and or live with the pressures of the modern day world?
Oh, well, there are some birds which are just like rats and exploit
urbanization.
Yeah. So, for example, gulls, herring gulls, for example, and no doubt there are American and New Zealand equivalents that do this. In Britain, herring gulls flourish on rubbish dumps, so they are, in the same way, kind of rats and mice among mammals are going the opposite direction from these endangered species you're talking about. They become extremely numerous because they can exploit human existence, human waste, and human food stores and things. But it is very sad that we're losing the species diversity, that we're losing so many species of not just birds and insects and
plants.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about this, because it is a lot of what we talk about in the podcast, a lot of endangered species. With the Anthropocene, the sixth mass extinction that many scientists believe that we're at the beginning of or in the midst of. So how do you see that impacting our natural world? I mean, you were one of the most well-respected scientists in the world, evolutionary biologist. So seeing the decay in the last, let's say, 50 years, how do you think that's going to impact our natural world in the next 100 or 1,000 years?
I'm no expert on it. I think you probably know more about it than me. I suppose if we lose lots of species, we end up with fewer species which become very successful, like gulls and rats and mice. monocultures in agriculture are a menace. I mean, they're efficient for producing food, but they're a complete menace as far as conserving wildlife is concerned. There are efforts in some countries to preserve things like hedgerows, which are refuges for quite a lot of species. But I don't really have much expertise in that field. I feel for it. I mean, I feel tragic, and the extinction is a genuine tragedy. It's an aesthetic feeling, a personal aesthetic feeling. I mean, if elephants go extinct or rhinoceroses go extinct, it is a tragedy of an emotional aesthetic type. For me, I don't want it to happen. I would like to see extinct species like thylacines brought back, which thylacine might be because it's extinct sufficiently recently that the DNA can be obtained. It would be a great thing to see woolly mammoths brought back, thylacinus brought back, woolly rhinoceroses brought back, Neanderthal humans, maybe.
Yes. It'd be interesting to study that, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh yes, and Chris is a huge fan of woolly mammoths, so he that's
I did some cloning in the early 2000s when it was the craze.
Oh, really?
Yeah, down at Texas A&M.
I mean, is it feasible to implant an embryo in an elephant?
We were working when I was at the University of Florida. Some of my research was we were looking on how to freeze semen of bull elephants because we don't have a good grasp on it yet. So our advanced reproductive technologies in elephants isn't quite there. So to be able to clone, I believe we'll be able to clone mammoth embryos. It's the fact of syncing up. I believe it was going to be Asian elephants as recips, if I remember right. So syncing that whole process up is going to be very difficult and very costly. And so it's going to cost, I know George Church and others are working on it, but I think in my lifetime, we might see a hybrid type woolly mammoth born, but we'll see.
Yes.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah, we're getting there.
Not everybody does. I mean, some people think there's a kind of moral argument against it, but I don't go along with that.
I was always a proponent for it. I said I was doing some genetic work, and I'm like, oh, they need me on this project because I wanted to figure out some recip genetics. But yeah, that's another story for another day.
But focusing on big picture, wonderful, great things, Dr. Dawkins, you have a foundation, and I would love for you to share with our audience just what the mission is of the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science.
Well, Reason and Science is what it is, and it recently merged with a large American foundation called the Center for Inquiry, CFI, which has for a long time been had an interest both in secularism and non-religious life, and also on skepticism about things like homeopathy and telepathy and flying saucers and things. I mean, at least testing, at least taking a scientific skeptical view of such things. So my foundation has merged with that, and so it's not possible for me to give an account of the aims of my foundation now separate from the CFI. So it's part of the same thing. And so, well, among the things that we're now doing is we have a project called TIES, that's Teacher Institute for Evolutionary Science, which is a teaching project, but it's not directly teaching children, it's teaching teachers how to teach evolution. And it's run by a wonderful woman called Bertha Vasquez, who's in Florida. She's a teacher, a high school teacher, a middle school teacher, I think, in Florida. And she runs courses for other teachers really to arm them in order against the kind of pushback that they get as soon as they come to evolution in the biology course. They get pushback from children, from parents, from school boards, from head teachers, and they are not necessarily equipped to answer these arguments that they get. And what Bertha's courses are doing is trying to give them the armament that they need, give them the arguments that they need. So that's one project. There's a project for rescuing people who are who are either not religious or anti-religious in places like Pakistan, places like Bangladesh.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
By sort of machete wielding mobs.
I was gonna say their life, yeah.
And threatened by justice system, which doesn't really take a very sympathetic view. So that's another of our projects. Quite a lot of it is about the skepticism. We take lawsuits against big shops, chain shops like Walmart in America, which sell homeopathic remedies. Not that that's necessarily should be illegal, but they don't distinguish them from real meds. So they're housed in the same shelves as real meds. And what we're trying to do with these lawsuits is to get them to put these quack remedies on separate shelves, preferably labeled these things don't work.
Oh, trust me, one of the classes I'm teaching right now is equine health and nutrition, and trying to talk to students about all the supplements that they can feed their horses, like turmeric and paprika. And I mean, they're wonderful seasonings on our human food, and there is some evidence in human medicine that they might be an anti-inflammatory, what have you, but they've never even been looked at in horses, or if they have, it's a crazy dose. And you understand the scientific process, but it can be hard to get that through to students that are just starting to learn it.
Yes, and I mean, it's actually rather a good lesson to consider. How would you investigate that? How would you?
And I just made that project yesterday, and I'm giving it to the students this week. And as a professor, it's always challenging when you give a new project, because you never know if it's going to sink or swim, if it's going to be good or bad. So I always ask for their feedback, but
that's a bit different from homeopathy, where, well, if you did an experiment to test homeopathy, there would be no difference between the experimental and the control.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, as we start to kind of wrap this up, because we're very cognizant of your time, just really quick, Dr. Dawkins, are we winning this science war, the communication? Because you are definitely one of the world's top science communicators. For years you've been out there in the public talking science, fighting for science. Do you feel like we're winning, the arguments?
I can't decide that. In some ways, I think we are. I mean, the COVID experience is perhaps revealing. I don't know how you feel about it. I feel that the prestige of science has gone up as a consequence of the astonishing speed with which these various vaccines have been produced. And I think we're now alerted to the danger that this may not be the last such pandemic that we have to endure. And I think, is it possible that the COVID experience has alerted people to the importance of science, how science, in something like the same way as Sputnik had alerted America to the need to really put money and effort into science. I wonder whether COVID perhaps has had a similar effect. I hope it has. It would be a silver lining.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Dr. Dawkins, You've had this prestigious, iconic career. I'm just having goosebumps thinking about all of your accomplishments. What is one or two that you're most proud of?
I suppose my second book, The Extended Phenotype, is the one I'm most proud of as a scientific achievement. But I do think communication is important too, and therefore the books that I've written, which are attempts to communicate science, I feel that they're a very worthwhile thing to have done. I'm glad to have done them. I'm glad to have got them under my belt and feel that that's a sense of achievement in my life.
And hopefully our listeners will go out and pick up The Flights of Fancy because it's so beautiful. And we'll put a lot of information about it on our show notes.
That's amazing.
But let's say one of our listeners reads the book and they're wanting to read another book of yours. What one or two books would you recommend after reading Flights of Fancy for people that have interest in some of these evolutionary theories and concepts?
Well, if they're young people, and Flights of Fancy is partly aimed at young people, if they're even younger, actually, then I suppose The Magic of Reality, which was specifically written for children and it's heavily illustrated. So that would be for young people. For adults, oh goodness.
I mean, I have my personal favorites.
What's that?
The Selfish Gene, The God Delusion, and now Flights of Fancy. So
yes, okay. Well, I'm pretty fond of them as well.
Oh, good.
Climbing Mount Improbable, I think, is my most underrated book in terms of sales. And I think it's one of the best, but it's sold, I think, among the least.
Well, you're going to get some copies sold after this podcast interviews, or after this podcast airs, and it'll definitely be with me and Chris. So you'll always have two more.
Yes, I'm going to be buying as many as I can,
and hopefully a lot more. I'll be giving them as holiday gifts, that's for sure. And I'm just curious because I know Darwin had such an effect in Dr. Tinbergen. I teach a lot of his concepts when I'm doing animal behavior, who was your professor, right?
Yes.
But now, in this day and age, who is influencing you currently?
I'm not sure about that. I think I'd rather not. I mean, mentioning dead people is fine.
Okay. Yeah. They're still influencing you.
To mention living people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're definitely a big influence on all of us. So that is a wonderful thing. And we definitely appreciate your time.
Yes.
Chris, did you have any?
Yeah, a couple more questions before we let you go, Dr. Dawkins. I've got to say, Flights of Fancy, go get the book. My library is now I'm going to start filling it up because the writing it's beautifully written. It's at a level where you just absorb it, and it's Flights of Fancy. I have to go back and read it again. Yeah.
In the evening to wind down after my kids go to bed and a busy day of work, I like to watch Netflix sometimes, some documentaries. But the past 2 weeks, when I read about 10 pages a night because I'm so tired, I have been skipping Netflix and jumping in bed, propping my pillows up, turning my little nightlight on, and enjoying this Flights of Fancy's book like none the other. It's re-energized me and refreshed my scientific curiosities. And so I'm really hopeful that our listeners out there will do the same, because at this point, it's much better than anything on Netflix.
Yeah.
That's very nice to hear. Thank you very much.
And you want the hard copy if you can get it, because it's just
it's beautiful. So beautiful. Yeah. It's almost like it could go on a coffee table too, as just a conversation piece, honestly, because of some of the artwork and how well the topics and chapters are laid out.
So
I think the publisher have done a good job, I must say.
Oh, they did fantastic. Final question. Are you working on the next book? Probably. And then where can our listeners follow you? I know you're on Twitter and social media. Is there somewhere else where they can go to learn, like if you're coming out or if you're speaking somewhere?
Yes. Well, Actually, we're just now in the process of putting together a website. It's not launched yet, but it will be launched very soon. It will be the URL will be richarddawkins.com. It's not there yet, but that's what it will be, richarddawkins.com. And that will certainly have a list of speaking engagements. It will have all my books up there, and a selection of articles as well. So that's that. Yeah, okay. I mean, and as for what I'm working on at the moment, I mean, I'm working on a new book called The Genetic Book of the Dead, which is sort of aimed at the same audience as The Selfish Gene. And I've done about 35,000 words of that so far. And so that's got a long way to go yet.
Amazing,
well, we look forward to hearing more about it in the future. And we definitely will keep our eye on richarddawkins.com. I myself will be very excited to see a lecture date somewhere in Florida, so that I can come hear you.
Whereabouts in Florida are you?
I'm where the University of Florida is. So it's Central Florida, a town called, yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
I spent a sabbatical in Gainesville once. I do know the place.
Okay. Well, you're more than welcome. I have an extra guest bedroom, lots of kids, dogs, and cats, but there is privacy. So,
what about New Zealand? Whereabouts in New Zealand?
In the Waikato, just south of Auckland. So definitely, you can come stay with us. I don't have any cats. I have 2 little kids, though, so they might drive you nuts. Just around Hamilton. So we're just south. And
obviously you're American, not
yes.
How come you're there?
Oh, that's a long story, but my ex-partner and my kid's mom is a research scientist, and so she had a job here. So we're helping the Kiwis. But yeah, beautiful country. I know you've been here. You've written quite a bit about it. It's one of the special places on Earth. Very unique biome. So I feel very
yes, and we hope it's not too much ruined by imported animals.
We're trying. Yeah. We're poisoning them as fast as we can. try to get rid of those mammals that don't belong here.
Well, it's one thing if they get there sort of by accident, but deliberately introducing them is a grievous sin.
Yeah, all the elk and everything on the South Island. Yeah, even American turkeys are here. So.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, Dr. Dawkins, oh my gosh, we feel so grateful that you were able to come on. The book is Flights of Fancy, Defying Gravity by Design and Evolution. I know we've had authors on before, but this is one. If I had to pick one, this one, it's a must read. It's an absolute must read. Introduces you to Dr. Dawkins' writing if you're not familiar with it. Beautiful book, Dr. Dawkins. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us today.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We really appreciate your time, and we look forward to many more books from you in the future. Maybe one on deep diving,
yes.
Or some other fantastical, amazing thing that all these creatures do. So thank you so much. And I will come see you in Florida, and we will be in touch. And we'll put all this information on our show notes for our listeners at allcreaturespod.com. And we will also keep you updated on social media about this interview and then other features that Richard Dawkins will be doing in the future.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. And I hope to have you back on the podcast again with your next book as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.